You are soaked in freezing seawater, and the thing keeping you alive might be sheep hair soaked in grease. Not magic, not brute toughness, survival. Your fingers stiffen, your breath turns white, the wooden ship rolls beneath you like an animal trying to throw you into the dark. Winter was not uncomfortable. Winter was a death machine. By the end of this story, you will understand how Vikings stayed warm on freezing ships without modern jackets, engines, heaters, or sealed cabins. And the answer is not what most people imagine. The survivors were not simply the hardest men on the sea. They were the ones who understood wool, wind, movement, timing, food, and fear. Picture the North Atlantic in the Viking Age, roughly from the late 700s to the 1000s. A long, narrow ship cuts through black water, sometimes with no cabin, no furnace, and no dry room waiting below. The sea does not care if you are brave. Archaeologists found that Viking clothing was not just random fur and leather. At first, they thought the popular image was close enough. Rough warriors wrapped in animal skins, usually protected by toughness and rage. Then they realized the real armor against cold was often woven: wool, linen, layering, cloaks, hoods, mittens. Textile fragments from Viking Age, graves and settlements show that wool was a major clothing material, while linen made from flax was also widely used, especially closer to the body. Wool mattered because it traps air, and trapped air slows heat loss. Even when damp, wool can still insulate better than many plant fibers. So on a freezing ship, your first shelter was not the ship, it was what you wore. But clothing was only the first wall. Researchers discovered that Viking ships were brilliant for speed, raiding, beach landings, and open water travel. At first, they thought the iconic longship looked almost too exposed to be practical in harsh weather. Then they realized that exposure was part of the design trade-off. A low, open vessel caught less wind from the side, could move through shallow water, and could be rowed or sailed by a crew packed close together. But that also meant cold rain, sea spray, and wind could reach your body again and again. There were no cozy private cabins on many warships, as a sailor could not simply step inside and warm up. The evidence comes from preserved ship finds, like the Oseberg, Gokstad, Skuldelev ships, and Roskilde finds, along with reconstructions tested on real water. The Viking ship was a masterpiece. It was also a cold place to suffer, and suffering forced another solution. Archaeologists found ship gear, sail evidence, and wooden vessel remains, showing that Viking sailors used flexible equipment, not fixed comfort. At first, they thought a sail was only about movement. Then they realized it could also become part of survival. On some voyages, crews may have used woolen sails, hides, cloaks, spare cloth, or temporary coverings to reduce wind and spray when conditions allowed. This does not mean every ship had a tent-like cabin. Researchers still debate the exact arrangements. But the logic is strong. If you're wet, wind is the killer. Wind strips warm air from your body. A simple barrier can mean the difference between shivering and losing control of your hands. The Vikings did not defeat cold with one invention. They fought it with layers of small advantages. And then came the heat inside the body. Researchers discovered that survival at sea depended on calories as much as clothing. At first, people imagined Viking endurance as pure toughness. Then, they realized warmth is chemistry. Your body burns food to make heat. Hard rowing, bracing against waves, hauling ropes, and staying alert in cold wind can consume enormous energy. Viking crews carried practical foods: dried fish, preserved meat, grain products, butter, cheese, and sometimes ale or water. None of it was glamorous, but calories were fire you could swallow. If you did not eat enough, your body cooled faster. If you stopped moving too long, your muscles stopped making heat. On a freezing ship, rowing was not only transportation, it was a furnace made of bodies. But even bodies have limits. Researchers studying cold exposure Know that wetness, wind, exhaustion, and immobility can lead toward hypothermia. At first, they thought cold killed, mainly when temperatures dropped far below freezing. Then they realized water and wind can make even milder cold deadly. Seawater pulls heat away from the body far faster than air. A soaked wool cloak, numb fingers, and a night watch in heavy wind could become a crisis. The evidence is not one Viking skeleton labeled froze on ship. It is the combined evidence of ship design, clothing materials, climate, voyage routes, and human physiology. Vikings survived because they reduced exposure whenever they could. They timed voyages. They hugged coastlines when possible. They beached ships. They shared labor. They stayed close. Imagine sitting awake while others sleep under cloaks. Imagine hearing ice-cold spray slap the hull again and again. Imagine knowing that if your hands fail, the rope fails. And if the rope fails, everyone may suffer. What would courage mean when courage is just staying warm enough to move? Then the story becomes more human. Because the greatest Viking survival tool was not an axe. It was cooperation. One person could row, another could bale water, another could watch the sail, another could share a cloak, a dry layer, a warning, a piece of food, a place out of the wind. A ship's crew survived as a moving body made of many bodies. Honestly, I think this is what makes the story so human. Your brain still fears cold, dark water. Your body still remembers the ancient rule. Stay dry, stay fed, stay together. We cannot know every detail of what happened, but the science underneath is solid. The Vikings stayed warm, not because the sea was merciful. They stayed warm because they turned wool, food, motion, timing, and each other into shelter. On freezing ships, warmth was not comfort. Warmth was survival before us. But picture one more night. The ship is not moving fast now. The wind has turned against you. The sail hangs heavy with damp. Every rope feels colder than bone. Someone near the bow coughs into his cloak. Someone else keeps rowing because stopping feels more dangerous than pain. This is where survival becomes quiet, not heroic, not loud, just one breath after another. Archaeologists cannot recover every frozen moment from the sea. Wood rots, cloth disappears, bodies vanish. But the fragments that survive still speak. A ship plank, a wool thread, a sail experiment, a preserved burial garment, a tool worn smooth by hands. Together, they tell us that warmth was planned. It was carried, it was repaired, it was shared, and it had to work before the storm arrived. Because once the sea turned violent, there was no time to invent survival. You had to already know it. You had to trust the person beside you. You had to trust the cloak on your shoulders. You had to trust the food in the chest. You had to trust the rhythm of the oars. You had to trust the old knowledge passed from sailor to sailor. That is the hidden technology of Viking warmth. Not one object, a system. Clothing against skin, wool against wind, food against exhaustion, movement against numbness, shorelines against open water, crew against fear. And when we look back now, the lesson is not that Vikings were superhuman. It is that humans survive by learning the rules of dangerous places. Your own body still knows this. When cold hits your skin, you pull your arms in. When wind cuts through your clothes, you search for shelter. When fear rises in the dark, you look for another human voice. On a freezing Viking ship, warmth was never just heat.